Hey guys, I'm Sai, and welcome to Ace Podcast Nation. On the channel, you'll find podcasts, interviews, and content on all types of subjects, including mental health, football, MMA, music, writing, and a whole lot more. You can view the video versions at youtube.com/Ace Podcast Nation, as well as listen to the audio. Download the audio versions of every show at iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and many more. Find us on your favorite podcasting app or YouTube, subscribe, and you'll get notified every time we upload a new show. Today is going to be an extremely interesting show, and these are always my favorite because they're kind of thought-provoking shows, and as we question what we know and also what we think we know, and I certainly discovered that upon reading this book. My guest today is an investigative journalist, an author. He's a double winner of the British Sports Journalist Award, who has successfully investigated football corruption, is a regular football analyst on TV news and sports programs, as well as being an author of over 85 books. He's the writer of the book that is the subject of today's show. The book's name is The Killing of Emiliano Sala. Please welcome Mr. Harry Harris. Welcome, Harry. Thanks for joining me. How are you?
Yeah, great. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Indeed. So we'll get into the book in a minute. I was one of these people, as I was just explaining to you before we recorded, who kind of saw the title of the book, and I thought, oh, there you go. Someone's jumping on the back of a tragedy, trying to make a profit, trying to make a few quid for themselves. And I was surprised straight away to find out the caliber of journalist who had written the book. So he instantly, in the first couple of pages, I was like, oh, all right, this is someone who's done a lot of good work, not just writing books for some of the biggest names in football, autobiographies and biographies, but also, done in proper investigative journalist in terms of investigating corruption and things like that. Like I said, before we get into the book, I was hoping you could tell me and the viewers, listeners, a bit about you, what you do, who you are, what sort of things you've worked on over the years, just so people can understand, the man behind the book.
Sure, yeah, pleasure. Always a pleasure talking about myself. It's certainly a subject that I know about. Well, I started in the Daily Mail, 4 years there, moved to the Mirror, nearly 19 years there as the key football writer, and then on to the Express Group, Daily Express, Daily Star, and Sunday Express for nearly another 9 years. And during all that period, I've been writing books more or less as a hobby, something that I really enjoy doing. And as you rightly pointed out, I've written 85 books, many on some of the biggest names, from Pele, who I've written his life story and have known him for an awful long time, Glenn Hoddle, Gullit, George Best. I wrote George Best's last book. And, it's a fascinating thing because in your introduction, you made a very valid point. And I'd like to expand upon it because when I wrote George Best's last book, he died, unfortunately, a few weeks before it was actually published, so he never saw it. His agent came to me and he said, look, I'm going to confess to you that, George died penniless and he has an enormous amount of debts, mainly hospital debts. Now, look, we were hoping that the book that you'd written, and I must point out this very important point, had been paid by the publishers. So I was not on the royalty or any cut of any further sales. Could I, in his place, do some promotional work to help sell the book? So I said yes. First one was on Sky. I was interviewed for some considerable time about George, about the book, held up the book. The Daily Mail wrote a big article saying I was profiteering from the death of George Best. Nothing further from the truth. They didn't ask my opinion. I had to sue them to get a retraction. So look, people jumped initially to the conclusion that I was profiteering by what happened here. As you say, as soon as people started reading the book, all that disappeared. Absolutely all of it. And the feedback has been hugely positive, and I'm very happy about that.
Yes, it's interesting because people see the title and they immediately think that you're trying to profiteer off the back of it, and you're trying to make money for yourself and this and that, but without asking, any questions or even reading the book in some cases. And like you say, when they do read the book, the opinion has changed quite quickly. And I was one of those people. I've got to say, I had one opinion going in. I tried to go into things, especially if I'm going to do shows, around them. I tried to go in with an open mind either way. But I did have this opinion going in. I think for me personally, and obviously I can only speak for me personally, going in for me, it was the title which kind of had rubbed me up the wrong way a little bit, which we will get into. But I wanted to just say to everyone and to yourself, the reasons why I invited you on, to talk about the book and stuff. I wanted to hear your reasons behind writing the book. I wanted to discuss the book generally. I also wanted to give people the opportunity to ask you questions, particularly the people maybe who are not best pleased or are finding it a bit controversial, to give them the opportunity to ask you any questions that they'd like to know the answers to, because it's always better. It's like you say, like you just mentioned with the newspaper who wrote that about you with George Best's book. They didn't come to you direct to the source, and find out whether that was the case. They just wrote it because you were doing the promotional work, and if they'd gone to you, they wouldn't have heard it. They wouldn't have ended up getting sued for a start. But but
no, you mentioned the background of why I've written this book, so it's important. A very good question. So it's important I give you the answer to that. I've been investigating with the Daily and Sunday Telegraph, or consulting with them with a very accomplished journalist there, Ben Rumsby.
Yes.
Who approached me to ask him to help on investigations, and I'd helped him on a previous investigation. And I contacted him and said, look, looking at the people involved here on this Emiliano Sala, I smell a rat. I think there's something wrong here. And together we spent virtually the last year investigating what had happened, and came up with some incredible conclusions. Obviously, not all of them could appear in the paper. Obvious reasons, the Telegraph only has a certain amount of space that they can devote to it. So I was accumulating over that year much more information that could possibly have appeared in the paper. During that period, there were some people out there who wanted to stop me doing this investigation and tried their best to achieve that. As a consequence of that, my initial thought was, and there was no thought of writing a book. It was the last thing on my mind. A couple of people at Cardiff, involved very closely, suggested after, as my investigations with the Telegraph continued, that I should write a book, and also it should be turned into a film.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I thought about that for a while, and still I was unconvinced, because there are people out there that wouldn't want you to read this book and wouldn't want me to write it. And as you pointed out, I've been an investigative journalist for many years, and you can suffer as a consequence. And I think you've probably found in a chapter there the background to the investigation at the Telegraph and the intimidation that journalists suffered as a consequence of that investigation. My feeling was, do I want to go through all of that? And the answer was no. But a couple of people persisted in saying, this should be turned into a book. And I actually approached numerous, you said I wrote 85 books, so I've written for virtually every single one of the major publishers. No one was interested in touching this book. For the obvious reasons I just pointed out to you, and I'm happy to elaborate on. There was too much involved, in my view, for them to want to do it. Probably too little interest for them to sell, to make any money from this book. There was probably, in their view, no money to be made. So I went to one of the very smallest publishers I'd worked for many years in the past, and for some, it was probably the last port of call, and for some reason they liked it and wanted to take it on, and hence it has been published.
Yeah, I guess from a publisher point of view, purely like a business point of view, they look at what's going to make them money, rather than maybe a story that needs to be told. And I do believe that there's so much more to this story than just a tragic plane crash where two people have lost their life. I do believe there's so much more to it, and what your book does exceptionally well is throughout the book it provides documentation of different things, whether it's the contracts and stuff like that. It's there's a lot in there which I didn't know, and I'm fairly well read up on the subject, so I would assume that a lot of other people don't know.
Well, you've just pointed out the contract. I mean, no one would have seen the contract that exists for the sale of this player. It first appears in the book, and that's right at the start. So, people have said, would there be any new material in it? Well, I believe there is an enormous amount of new material, and you touched on the first thing that pops up very early in the book. And that's the actual wording of this contract. Even that is fascinating, and I've done an analysis of what it means, and why so many people were so keen to push this transfer through.
Yeah, so I mean, let's go into that part of it first. Obviously, the contract that we're referring to is a contract between Nantes and it's I'm not sure how it's pronounced, Mercato Sports Limited, which is Mark Mckay's company. Is that the right? It's Mark Mckay's company with Willie Mckay's wife, I think, is the two owners of that company. So the name on that contract is Mark Mckay, which is Willie Mckay's son, who has correct me if I'm wrong, obviously you're more researched on it. From what I can gather from the contract, obviously it's in French as well, is an agreement between Nantes and Mark Mckay to sell Emiliano Sala. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favourite, you touched upon the fact that I've done a lot of investigations in the past. One of my favourite stories, of course, is how Harry Redknapp went over to Monaco and opened an account in the name of his dog.
Yeah.
And, this came up in his trial, and of course he was found not guilty, although he admits quite readily he had his bags packed, ready to go to jail. But the wise men of the jury found him innocent, and quite rightly so. That's their opinion. That's the way justice goes in this country. But,
Indeed.
Why would you have a company in the name of your father's wife?
Yes, it's a strange one, isn't it? It's obviously, as you discuss in the book, Willie Mckay is banned from being a football agent in France, which again I wasn't aware of. I just assumed he was a football agent. He worked all around the world, etc. And then straight away you get into this kind of seedy underbelly where Willie Mckay is involved in the transfer of Emiliano Sala and trying to sell him. Even before you involve Cardiff City, he was involved with his son in trying to find Sala a new club. He wrote a letter to Emiliano in which he goes through how he's got clubs who are interested. He contacted the player directly, but he's not allowed to work as a football agent in France. It's obviously, so his son's name is on the contract. So straight away, you've got this kind of two-part thing to it where Willie Mckay shouldn't be working on a transfer in France because he's banned. But he's written to Emiliano Sala telling him, that he's got clubs interested in him from the Premier League, including Cardiff City. So, which to me, straight away, that shouldn't be happening because he's banned. How does that come up? Like, one, how does that come about? But also, how is that able to go on when agents are banned in certain countries?
Well, that's a very good question. You tell me. I have no idea. And I checked with the FA, and the FA gave me a statement in this country, and that he is not registered as an agent in the UK, and hasn't been for some time. Willie Mckay's explanation, and title to his explanation, as I understand it, he couldn't be bothered to take the exams that had come in a few years back, and so just didn't have a license to be an agent in the UK.
It's strange, isn't it, that someone who's not a licensed agent has been so heavily involved in transfers over the years, whether it's with transfers with Neil Warnock or with Harry Redknapp or other managers and players. And there's some big players who he's been a part of their transfers also. So obviously you've got the contract there with which is between Nantes and Mark Mckay, where they have an agreement. Or so with that agreement, is that just an agreement to sell to Cardiff, or is that a general agreement that they will find him, or Mark Mckay will find him a new club? How does that sort of contract work?
You read the letter. They don't mention Cardiff. I mean, I think if he'd have written to the player mentioning Cardiff,
no, he didn't come, did he?
I think the player would have laughed. He said he told the player he was taken into Liverpool, Manchester United. I don't know. He didn't mention Real Madrid and Barcelona, so I've no idea why he didn't mention them. But he mentioned some of the biggest clubs in English football.
Yes, yeah. Is that type of contract common, where an agent has got a contract with a football club with an agreement to sell the player for the club? Would that be in every transfer?
Well, agents get mandates from the clubs, so we're not talking about Willie Mckay. I've investigated Willie Mckay for the best part of 40 years.
Yeah.
And it was most amusing to see one of the tweets from early on, actually more recently, you suggested, or was I in league with Willie Mckay, and that's why I wrote the book. I thought that was most amusing. In any case, look, what football clubs get up to, why they engage people like Willie Mckay is because they have one interest, and that's self-interest. They have an absolute desire to sign players as cheaply as they can, and they engage with these agents. I'm baffled. Why can't a club deal with another club? Why do they need an agent?
Yeah, that's like the age-old question for me. It doesn't make any sense why clubs just don't, speak to each other and get the transfers done. And I was amazed with the amount of agents that are involved in any one deal. It's not even a case of, the player's one agent and then the two clubs, the selling and the buying club. There's literally can be, 5, 6, 7, 8 agents getting paid, in different ways for different things. It's remarkable. But
so
just going,
I must say here, I'm not talking about Willie Mckay specifically. I'm talking generally in real terms about agents. So your point about how many agents, I mean, Jerome Anderson, you may have heard of, very heavily linked with Arsenal, and he went to Blackburn Rovers, and he told me that he was being hounded by the media because they said he'd pocketed £40 million from a series of transfers at Blackburn Rovers.
Wow.
But, what the guy is telling me was that, look, some transfers, there could be 8, 10, 12 people, all with their fingers in the pie, all buzzing around doing little bits and pieces to facilitate one single transfer. You have to ask why that is necessary and what they are up to. And it's clear when you sit down and think about it, there's only one conclusion you can come to.
Yeah, it does seem to all be about the amount of money and the almost the ease at the way these agents seem to be able to make multi-million pounds from one big transfer. They make so much money, more money in some cases than they'll spend in a lifetime. So I had a couple of questions about Willie Mckay specifically. Obviously, someone asked again on Twitter last night if you were friends with Willie Mckay. This is obviously not the case. You just said you've been investigating him, on and off for 40 years. In the book, you describe so after the crash and after Emiliano Sala's death, obviously over time you were part of a team which was releasing stories in the Telegraph, which was exposing different aspects of, in some cases, not even exposing, just talking about different aspects of the aftermath of the crash, which Willie Mckay did not take kindly to. I think it was on the way back from the funeral in Argentina. He threatened, I believe, was it Kenneth Cho, who is the Cardiff City, I forget what he is. I think he's the chief executive. Obviously, and then this what's the word? This kept happening with Willie Mckay. He was threatening, particularly people from Cardiff. I believe in the book it says, in the book it says there was an employee of Cardiff who was, having a coffee in a very affluent area of London, minding his own business, and he was sort of accosted by Willie Mckay and threatened. Cardiff actually involved the police. Is that correct? Where they complained about the threats?
Yeah, there was 4 witness statements from the Cardiff club sent to the police. Yes,
and that was regarding death threats. Is that correct?
They were allegations.
Ah, right, okay, yeah. Allegedly, I would say definitely. Yeah, and I mean, have you personally received sort of any threats or any aggressive behaviour from Mr. Mckay over your, the book and your investigations of him during this time?
Well, I mean, you can see from the one of the chapters about the intimidation that the journalists, not just Telegraph, but what the other journalists I've mentioned, and their reaction to what occurred. And you'd mentioned the people at Cardiff. The Metropolitan Police did investigate the one in London because it came under their jurisdiction. I think there's a comment there that they didn't consider it to be a threat to life. And you look at we talked about Willie Mckay. You just need to Google him and look at his very colourful background. His suspension by the FAE, the police finding cocaine in the boot of his car, to all sorts of manner of shape and things. But there's nothing I can find relating to any violence, GBH. So you would probably have to give him the benefit of the doubt that it was a violent temper and threats because he was, and he made the point. He went on the record to the Telegraph that he said that if people were threatening his family, particularly his son, who obviously was involved in the transfer, he was very angry about it, and you can understand why any father would be. So it's only right and fair to give the other side of the coin, and then that's we've done that as much as possible. Always asked, as I understand it from the Telegraph, always asked for Willie Mckay's point of view and his reaction to the story. So I don't think he has any right to complain if he's been given the right to reply.
Yeah, and I think there is 2 sides to every story. And obviously, like you say, Willie Mckay has taken a lot of criticism following the crash, which for reasons which we will discuss in a minute. Obviously, his son is named on the contract with Nantes, so he's taken a lot of flack as well. So it's like you say, it's only natural for a father to be protective, and from your research and everything, it does seem that it's more that he's got a violent temper rather than actual violent behavior. However, for that person who was in the cafe, who I think in the book they asked not to be named, I believe, wasn't it? But for them that must have been very intimidating, and to be kind of accosted and threatened or whatever and shouted at, it's not nice, and it's you're going to feel intimidated. There was one thing, just lastly, on kind of this aspect of it, because I do want to focus more on on the crash and things like that. With Willie Mckay, do you think, I know the player liaison officer of Cardiff City since left the club, do you have any information, or do you know whether he left because of anything to do with that threatening behaviour, or were they two separate sort of things?
Well, I endeavoured to contact him and ask him that very question, but he has not surfaced in the sense of answering my question on that, or anybody else's, as far as I know. Not that I know if anyone's asking it, but
Yes.
I did attempt, part of the investigation, to ask him that very question. The fact that he's declined to even respond to any communication I've made, you only have to draw your own conclusions on why he left.
Yeah, it's a strange one, because he had been at Cardiff for a few years, and by all accounts, everything that I know, he was popular and he enjoyed his job, and then he left, and I think there is another side to that, where it might have been, anyone who met Emiliano from Cardiff, or were involved in bringing him over to Cardiff City, they're gonna be stricken with emotion, when he died, because they met him, they were welcoming him to the club, to the country. So it obviously hit those people hard, particularly, you could only see by how it affected Neil Warnock over the following months. It was clear to everyone, even for people like myself who don't know him personally. You could see by his interviews and everything, how much it had affected him.
Yeah, well, it would have affected Callum even more so, because he was liaison player officer, and he was dealing with his travel arrangements, and clearly waiting at the airport when he didn't show up.
Yeah,
I mean, he must have been traumatized by the whole experience.
Yeah, and I mean, in the book, you have WhatsApp conversations between Callum, who's the Cardiff City player liaison, and Emiliano Sala. Was he the one? Was he the person who asked Emiliano to, said, we will put you on the British Airways flight back to Cardiff, and then at which point Emiliano said no, the Mckays are sorting out transport. Was he the person who said that, or did that come from someone else?
No. I think you can read the
WhatsApp. Just trying to.
It's all sort of like, it's self-explicit. We've published all of the WhatsApp communications, numerous of them, and I think it's self-explicit when you read it.
Yes.
I think it makes it perfectly clear exactly what happened.